exploring how we can master ourselves by looking at how authors and experts say it is possible, with your host, Shashiti Basu. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 98 of How to Be, with me, Shashiti, as your timid presenter, guiding you through life's tricky topics and skills by reading through the best books out there. The reason why death is scary are often related to the fears of the unknown, of non-existence, of eternal punishment, of a loss of control, and fear of what will happen to the people we love. While research indicates that just over 20% of people report having a fear of dying, this fear varies depending on a person's sex, age, and health status. Not to mention, the less something is openly discussed, the scarier it becomes. So why is it so hard to accept death, and how do we have conversations around it? Here is writer Rupert Callender, who became an undertaker through his experience of bereavement and wrote the new book, What Remains, on his thoughts.
The 17th century French moralist François de la Rochefoucauld said, "Neither death nor the sun can be looked at with a steady eye." And he was right. Without the comfort of a faith and belief in an afterlife, death can be a terrible event horizon, an existential black hole that sucks in our light and yet is always there at the back of our minds. Talking about it can be an emotional minefield, yet talk about it we must. But how? Gently and clearly, without confusing and unhelpful euphemisms that can be particularly damaging for bereaved children, who can take well-meaning phrases like fallen asleep or we've lost grandpa literally. Like Rochefoucauld, we need to approach the idea of death stealthily, with enough space to take time out from the conversation. After all, talking about death is really talking about life, and it requires a delicate step.
Our first book is from Dr Kathryn Mannix, who has spent her medical career working with people who have incurable advanced illnesses. Starting in cancer care and changing career to become a pioneer of the new discipline of palliative medicine, she has worked in teams in hospitals, and in patients' own homes to deliver palliative care, optimizing quality of life even as death is approaching. Having qualified as a cognitive behavioural therapist in 1993, she started the UK's first CBT clinic exclusively for palliative care patients and devised CBT First Aid, training to enable palliative care colleagues to add new skills to their repertoire for helping patients. Dr. Mannix has worked with many thousands of dying people and has found their ability to deal with illness and death both fascinating and inspirational. She believes that a better public awareness about what happens as we die would reduce fear and enable people to discuss their hopes and plans with the people who matter to them. She is the author of Listen, How to Find the Words for Tender Conversations, and we're talking about her best-selling book, With the End in Mind. It was eye-opening speaking with her, hence here's a snippet of our chat, but find the full interview on www.howtobe247.com on the YouTube channel.
I think it's layered. I think there are probably different things in different places and for different people. So partly it's cultural, and there are some places in the world where it's rude or it's in some way not respectful to have that conversation. And I have colleagues who work in palliative care in places where actually they have to be very, very careful to get permission to transgress in order to be able to have that conversation in a respectful way. But I think here in the UK, it's a mixture of things. It's not a pleasant subject, is it? It's a thing that we try not to think about because it makes us sad. And if it makes us sad, then maybe it's going to make the person that I try to talk to about it sad. And that feels like maybe that's not a kind thing to do. But it turns out that not talking about it also makes us sad. It makes us sad at a different time. So people reach the end of their lives wishing they knew more, or people reach bereavement wishing they'd said the really important things in their hearts, and they haven't said them in case they caused distress. And now they carry the regret of not having said. So it turns out, if you offer to talk about dying, people don't back away. People actually lean in and go, oh, yeah, do you know, I've always wondered about that. So we describe it as a taboo, but I'm not convinced actually that it is a taboo. I think we're just all a little bit too polite. I guess it's a little bit like tightrope walking. And I suspect that the guy who's walking the tightrope, or the gal who's walking the tightrope, doesn't think about walking the tightrope very much, because once they start to think about it, they'll overthink it. And I wonder whether we overthink a little bit in these conversations too, instead of just trusting ourselves. We've been able to speak in words that describe what's going on inside us since we were about 3 years old. And we don't stop and think about it. We don't try and plan the words. We just open our mouths and the thing we meant to say, more or less, comes out. So maybe the thing that we could do thinking about is not overthinking, oh, okay, so I'm going to go and talk to my mum about what funeral arrangements she would like. So I'm going to start by saying, okay, Mum, I really hope this isn't going to upset you, and I promise it won't take very long. Okay, so I have to start like that, and that's the next thing I need to say. I've got a kind of list in my head. Now I'm thinking about the tightrope, aren't I? I'm thinking about the conversation. Instead of going in and talking to my mum like she's my mum and I'm her daughter and saying, Mum, this thing, you know, keeps coming round in my head and I'm worrying about it a bit. Can we talk about it? And being one's mother, almost certainly that person will say, oh, I don't like the idea that you're worrying about something. What can I do to help? And then you say, well, actually, it is a thing that you might particularly want to talk about, but I think it could help me a lot if I knew what plans you wanted for your funeral, or if you got really sick and couldn't tell the doctors what you wanted and they asked me what you wanted, crikey, I wouldn't know. You know, could we talk about that sometime? And I think the other thing there is, it's an invitation into a conversation, isn't it? Rather than just going in and thinking, right, I've got to get in, I've got to get to the bottom of it, I've got to sort it all out, and I've got to get out without causing anybody to be distressed, because you know, conversations are collaborative things, and what happens. So, and I guess really a lot of that comes in my second book, Listen, which I'd never intended to write, but came from the feedback from the first book, which was, okay, you've convinced us we need to talk about this stuff. But how on earth do you start those conversations? So the second book isn't really a deathly book. It is a book about conversations that we feel a bit daunted about getting into, including these ones. I think denial is a really interesting thing to talk about because it's it's two-sided. If you can really believe that the thing that's upsetting everybody else isn't true, if you can really deeply believe that, hold that belief in your mind at all times, then because it's not true, you won't feel the distress of it. And there's a story in the book of a young woman who never believed that she was so sick that she would die. And she was remarkable. So denial, we talk about it as though it's a bad thing, but actually if it really, really works, it can be a very protective thing. The difficulty is that everybody around the sick person who's not doing denial now is stymied because they don't know how to talk in front of that person about the things that matter most to them. The difficulty we have that most people have, and that this dear woman didn't have, because I'd known her a long time. I'd known her when I was a cancer doctor when she first started her treatment. And then I looked after her again when I was a palliative care doctor towards the very end of her life. And her denial never wavered. But a lot of people, towards the end of their lives, the wheels start to come off. You know, it gets increasingly difficult to pretend that everything's okay and you haven't got the energy to get out of bed. You've lost your appetite, maybe you're comfortable, you don't breathe as easily as you used to, or whatever. And gradually the reality dawns, breaks through the denial and causes anxiety, which then is difficult to deal with because there isn't enough time left to process it. Whereas people who go through the process of, and you'll understand this, getting a diagnosis of an illness that's serious and might be going to progress, that's not good news. There's no way you're going to make that into good news. And the person goes into a period of emotional upping and downing of, well, what if this and what if that? And oh my God, if that happens, what about this and what about that? And gradually they get the information they need to think, okay, well, what if that? Well, I need a plan in case that happens, but that isn't usually what happens to people like me with this illness. So the more they have information, the more their anxiety level comes back down to, okay, my life is going to be different from what I was expecting, but I know what to expect now, and I can make a different plan to deal with what's unfolding in my life instead. So that anxiety phase doesn't persist for an indefinite amount of time. It gradually is replaced by a new plan. But if that is deferred until very close to dying, then that's quite difficult for people. That family, the story of the elderly dad who was brought into hospital by ambulance, that was the family that tipped me over the edge into campaigning, and the book was a result of that, because it was just patently obvious that this man was in his late 70s. He had so many different things wrong with him. It was easier to summarize what was still working okay, really. And his sons were unable to deal with it. And yet their mother said to them, your dad and I have talked about this a lot. I always hoped that I would die before him, and he hoped that he would die before me, but we both knew one of us would have to die first. And now is not the time for, heroic, intrusive treatment that isn't going to help him. What we have to do now is help him to be peaceful. So what's interesting is that although the sons couldn't talk about it because he was their dad, even though the sons were in their 70s, he was still their dad. They were like little boys because this was their precious dad. But their mum and dad, who were aging together, were also talking about the consequences of aging together, and they were wondering about how they would each deal with it when the time came that it was clear that one or other of them was dying. So I wonder what would have happened if the sons had allowed Dad to talk about it. And of course, they both confessed then in the resuscitation room in the hospital that Dad had tried to have a conversation with each of them, and each of them had closed it down because they felt uncomfortable. So one of the things that I see happening, and you may have explored this a bit, I don't know, is that there are ways that people can talk about dying that aren't with their families. And Death Cafe is one of those movements where people can go and meet complete strangers, people who don't have an emotional investment in what their end of life will be like. And quite often, I've been to a lot of death cafes now, there are people who talk about, I want to practice saying what I need to say to my kids. I want to practice what I need to say to my parents about my illness because they find it so difficult to listen to. Or this is what happened when I told my family. Oh, that's really interesting. Okay, that might be a way that I could approach it. So death cafes talk about anything and everything. So your listeners might not know about death cafes, but it's an international movement. They've got a website, and they've got a logo, which is fantastic, which is really gorgeous. China cup and saucer with a skull on it. And it's just a place where the rules are, it has to be free to attend. Anybody can run one. There has to be excellent cake. So, I'm already a supporter. And that you talk about what you want to talk about. So I've heard people talking about their beliefs about what happens after you die. Is there an afterlife or not? If there is, or, what is it about? I've heard people talking about funeral plans, talking about how to talk to their families about their illness, or, whether they would, particularly after COVID, quite a lot of people discussing, would they have wanted to be in an intensive care unit, or would they have preferred to take their chances and stay at home and not be separated from their families, because people made those sorts of choices, didn't they, during COVID? So I think maybe these are conversations that are a little bit easier to have with people you're not emotionally entangled with, which brings me all the way back to your question, which was, how do you know what to say? And I think for me, there were two things. I am not at all perturbed about talking about dying. I have seen ordinary dying up close and personal thousands and thousands of times. And the more I see it, the less afraid I am for myself and for my family. So if somebody wants to talk about it, then I will talk about it. So I'm not trying to manage the conversation so we don't go there. And I think that makes me more relaxed. And sometimes we will go there, and usually we won't. But if we do, that's okay. So I'm not getting het up as the conversation drifts deathwards. And then the other thing is that I'm this person's doctor. I'm not their daughter. I'm not their wife. I'm not their best friend. So they can say things to me where they don't have to worry about whether it's going to make me sad because my life is entwined with theirs. So maybe that's given me lots of different kind of windows to look through into so many, hundreds of thousands of families. And it's an incredible privilege, really, isn't it? And it's meant that when I have been beside my own dear people at the end of their lives, I'm forewarned. I know what to expect. I understand what the process is going to be. But it's still harder to talk about it with the people that I love than it is with the people who I serve as their doctor.
With the end in mind provides a powerful antidote to the fear, ignorance, and misunderstanding that surrounds death in contemporary culture. In the past, individuals typically passed away within the comfort of their homes, in the presence of loved ones. However, in modern times, many end their lives in clinical settings, like hospitals or ambulances, attended by healthcare professionals and machines. Consequently, most of us lack first-hand experience with death and approach its finality with uncertainty. Our limited exposure to the topic often leads us to anticipate the worst, especially when media portrays death in exaggerated, dramatic ways. Terminal illnesses encompass a range of conditions, yet a common pattern emerges in how most patients with these illnesses approach the end of life. It typically commences with a gradual decline in energy, initially barely noticeable year by year, but accelerating over time, transitioning from month to month, week to week, and finally day to day. This stage signals that the end is nearing. However, the actual moment of passing is not consciously experienced. As energy diminishes, more sleep is needed to compensate, and periods of unconsciousness become longer. Eventually, one remains unconscious continuously. Breathing slows until it gently ceases. Remarkably, this process lacks the pain, panic, or conscious fading that might be expected. It unfolds without awareness. Understanding this general pattern can offer comfort to both patients and their loved ones, dispelling fears of a painful or dramatic demise. It also provides time for farewells when a patient's energy dwindles rapidly. While there are exceptions to this pattern, this awareness can offer valuable emotional preparation and solace during a difficult time. The general pattern of dying offers a relatively positive perspective on the final stages of terminal illness, but exceptions exist, revealing darker aspects. In some cases, a patient may follow the typical pattern until experiencing a final surge of energy before passing away. Holly's story exemplifies this phenomenon as she battled late-stage cervical cancer. While seeking relief from debilitating nausea, the medication granted her an unexpected burst of energy, causing restlessness. Dr. Mannix intervened with another medication to restore tranquility, yet Holly's energy was nearly depleted when she finally slept. She peacefully passed away surrounded by her family. On the other hand, Alex's death illustrates a different exception: sudden, unforeseen demise. Despite successful cancer treatment, he suffered a fatal hemorrhage triggered by chemotherapy complications. These unexpected deaths, though distressing, account for only a quarter of all global fatalities. Importantly, such events typically result in unconsciousness before awareness, offering a sliver of solace amid tragedy. While the general pattern provides a framework for understanding the dying process, These exceptions remind us of the complex and unpredictable nature of terminal illness, underscoring the importance of individualized care and emotional support during these challenging times. When faced with life's ultimate challenge, a terminal illness, individuals often unearth inner reserves of strength and resilience they never knew they possessed. Eric's story vividly exemplifies this phenomenon. Diagnosed with a devastating motor neuron disease, also known as amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, Eric initially contemplated suicide as paralysis loomed. As an independent, self-reliant individual, the prospect of helplessness and burdening his loved ones tormented him. However, as the disease progressed and paralysis took a hold, Eric discovered his ability to adapt and find happiness within his limitations. Despite being confined to a wheelchair, he guided his family in tending to his beloved vegetable garden, ensuring it thrived. He retained his strong-willed, independent spirit and continued savouring life's small pleasures, such as sharing meals with his wife, even when he was supposed to be fed through a tube. Through these coping strategies, Eric defied the odds, living through the seasons and cherishing one last beautiful Christmas with his family. His journey illustrates how individuals can summon resilience and find ways to embrace life's joys amid the most daunting challenges, ultimately revealing the incredible strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. Coping with a terminal illness is highly individual, with no one-size-fits-all approach. People employ different strategies based on their personalities and circumstances, and one such strategy is denial. Denial can serve as a simple and effective way to shield oneself from the emotional distress of difficult situations by refusing to acknowledge the problem's reality. However, denial's effectiveness diminishes in the face of a terminal illness, as the disease progresses relentlessly regardless of belief. Yet, denial isn't always an unhealthy coping mechanism, as demonstrated by Sally. Suffering from widespread melanoma, she remained fully aware of her dire condition, but chose to maintain a cheerful facade, discussing future plans and naming children she hoped to have. Dr. Mannix initially considered confronting Sally with the harsh truth, but her mother intervened, recognizing that Sally was using this strategy as a coping mechanism to shield herself from overwhelming sadness. Rather than focus on the inevitable, they decided to support Sally in her game of pretend, emphasizing their love and appreciation for her. Sally's case illustrates that denial, when used as a protective shield to maintain hope and emotional well-being, can be a valid coping strategy. It highlights the importance of empathy and understanding when dealing with individuals facing terminal illnesses, allowing them to navigate their journey in a way that brings them comfort and peace. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, emerges as a powerful tool for helping terminally ill patients manage their conditions by identifying and modifying thought, emotion, and behavior patterns. Dr. Mannix, a pioneer in applying CBT to end-of-life care since 1993, highlights its potential with the story of Mark, a 22-year-old with cystic fibrosis. Mark's deteriorating lung function led to panic attacks. CBT allowed him to recognize the thought-emotion-behavior patterns behind these episodes. He associated shortness of breath with imminent danger, triggering adrenaline release, escalating stress symptoms, and reinforcing his fear of impending death. CBT interventions reframed Mark's thought pattern, shifting it from "I'm dying" to "these are adrenaline symptoms that will pass." Dr. Mannix emphasized that such symptoms could also occur in non-threatening situations like weddings or sports events. This reinterpretation interrupted the cycle of escalating fear and anxiety, enabling Mark to preempt his panic attacks. Mark's case illustrates CBT's efficacy in helping individuals with terminal illnesses reframe their thought processes, managing emotional responses, and change behaviors to improve their quality of life. By addressing cognitive and emotional aspects of their conditions, CBT offers valuable support in navigating the challenges of terminal illness. In the late 1980s, Louisa's life took a devastating turn when, while shopping for her daughter Penny's wedding dress, her hip bone, unexpectedly fractured, leading to a grim diagnosis of incurable secondary cancer originating from her previously beaten breast cancer. Her deepest sorrow wasn't facing death, but the prospect of missing her daughter's wedding from a hospital bed, plunging her into deep depression and withdrawal. CBT, introduced by a colleague of Dr. Mannix, offered a lifeline. Through many experiments, Louisa rediscovered her capabilities, reviving her self-esteem and appearance. A newfound friendship with Millie, also battling the same cancer, inspired her to dream big, pursuing an experimental hip joint replacement surgery she had initially been too despondent to consider. The surgery's success fueled Louisa's sense of purpose, leading her to actively support Penny's wedding preparations, sparking a positive feedback loop that improved her mood. In her wheelchair, Louisa attended her daughter's wedding, living out her dream. Tragically, Louisa passed away 3 months later, followed by Millie the following week. This poignant story illustrates the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of hope and support. Louisa's journey, buoyed by CBT, demonstrates how finding purpose and engaging with life's joys can empower individuals even in the face of a terminal illness, making the most of their remaining time. In modern society, death has become a taboo subject, leading to conspiracies of silence where conversations about it are avoided or suppressed. This avoidance can create communication problems, impacting healthcare decisions and emotional support for those approaching the end of life. Dr. Mannix's patient, Jerry, exemplified the consequences of such silence. His advanced heart disease left his children unaware of his end-of-life wishes, hindering decisions about life support. The story of Joe and Nellie, a loving couple married for 50 years, serves as a cautionary tale. Despite their history of openness and teamwork, they hid their knowledge of Nellie's advanced ovarian cancer from each other, believing they were protecting the other from the painful truth. Each thought the other was unaware of the diagnosis, leading to self-imposed loneliness and a lack of mutual support during a challenging time. Dr. Mannix ultimately facilitated their confession of the shared secret, allowing Joe and Nellie to confront their situation together and find solace in each other's company during Nellie's final days. These narratives underscore the need for open and honest discussions about death and end-of-life issues. Breaking the conspiracies of silence can lead to better decision-making and emotional support, enabling individuals and their loved ones to navigate this challenging phase with understanding and empathy. Terminal illnesses aren't just about dying. They encompass a phase of living as well. This period, often lasting weeks, months, or even years, forms a distinct chapter in one's life story. While it represents life's final chapter, its preciousness lies in being the last chance to fulfill desires and dreams. People facing terminal illnesses approach this phase in various ways. Some discover new interests or rekindle old ones, as seen in the bond formed over jazz between a retired psychiatrist and a hospital cleaner. Others use this time to tie up loose ends, like deep-sea diver Pete, who devoted his final weeks to organising his family's garage to ease their future burdens. Many focus on shaping their legacy, often in personal and modest ways. The story of Sylvie, a 19-year-old leukemia patient, exemplifies this. She aimed to create a rocking chair cushion for her mother as a way to ensure her presence even after passing. Sylvie's act of love demonstrated that despite a tragically short life, her impact and affection endured. These narratives emphasize that the phase of living through terminal illness is an integral part of the human experience. It offers opportunities for personal growth, strengthening bonds, and leaving behind meaningful legacies, highlighting the resilience of the human spirit even in the face of mortality. Before we talk about the next book, we had an interview with Wendy Mitchell, who wrote One Last Thing, How to Live with the End in Mind on the website, so here's a snippet from that, and remember to check it out on the website. Mitchell wrote the bestseller, Somebody I Used to Know, about her experiences with early onset dementia.
Death and dying is the one thing that is going to happen to 100% of the world's population. And yet we give it so little airspace, so little value in this country. And I hadn't realized that until we started writing it. We seem to feel in our country, in our culture, to talk about this uncertainty. And so I wanted to, just as I took away the fear of dementia, I want to take away the fear of talking about dying. Because if we don't, we leave our loved ones such massive problems that we wouldn't want our loved ones to feel, to have to cope with. So talking is a very underestimated medium.
Our final book is from Atul Gawande, who is also a doctor, author, researcher, and professor at the Harvard School of Public Health. Being mortal helps the reader navigate and understand one of life's most sobering inevitabilities, death. Here he is speaking to PBS's Frontline.
One of the reasons I write is it gives me my chance to dive into problems that I'm very confused about. I've written about, what are we supposed to do about the cost of healthcare? Why is the malpractice system so crazy and what's the way it should be? I've written about why do we itch? If it's confusing and interesting to me, writing is my way of diving in and figuring out what to at least think about it. And this was one of the big ones. The two big unfixables are aging and dying. They're not, you can't fix those. We're afraid of talking to the patient about these problems as well. A lot of doctors feel like, I know how to have this conversation. I know exactly what I'm doing. But what I could see over and over again was that we weren't particularly good at handling people going through the last phase of their life. I've had to learn that because of patients with whom, they did not end up with a good experience at all. And then I've had to learn it the hard way because of my dad.
Do you remember when Dad first started to get pain in his neck?
He thought either playing too much tennis or this muscle.
And instead what they found was a tumor, a huge tumor. I remember I took notes in my journal around that time. This is my dad saying, the way things are going, I could be bedridden in a few months. The tumor had extended into his midbrain. The suggestion was that we should go see what options there might be for chemotherapy. So the oncologist lays out 8 or 9 different options, and we're swimming in all of it. Temozolomide, vincristine, vinblasty. And my dad says, well, what if I don't take any? And she said, well, that's your choice. Then started talking about how, you really should think about taking the chemotherapy. Who knows? You could be playing tennis by the end of the summer. I mean, that was crazy. It made me very bad because it was,
completely not right, yeah.
This guy's potentially within weeks of being paralyzed. It was holding out a hope that was not a realistic hope in order to get him to take the chemotherapy.
When he made the final decision that he doesn't, want to, I told him, for me, it's okay if you're paralyzed, so what? I can take care of you. And that's the main difference. It was not fine for him.
The oncologist was being totally human. And the oncologist was talking to my dad the way that I have been talking to my patients for 10 years. But hope is not a plan. And in fact, we find from our trials that we are literally inflicting therapies on people that shorten their lives and increase their suffering out of an inability to come to good decisions.
That was Dr. Gawande speaking with his mother in that recording. As the age-old saying goes, death and taxes stand as the two inescapable certainties in life. While we become accustomed to paying our dues to the taxman, many of us struggle to accept the undeniable truth that we will eventually face our own mortality. It's a topic that requires our attention. Medical advancements have significantly extended our lifespans, stretching out the period of decline leading to death. What was once a relatively swift transition may now become a potentially prolonged and challenging journey. Both as individuals and as a society, it's imperative that we confront this reality and find ways to transform dying from a dreaded and endured experience into something more meaningful and manageable. Discussing death and disease may be uncomfortable, but these inevitabilities touch every individual directly as they age and indirectly as loved ones age and pass away. Due to their unavoidable nature, addressing these topics is of paramount importance. As we grow older, our bodily systems gradually weaken. Organs lose efficiency, bones and muscles lose mass, and blood vessels and joints harden. This process leads to increased strain on the heart, contributing to high blood pressure in the elderly. Additionally, the brain undergoes shrinkage, often resulting in dementia. These age-related changes render us more susceptible to injuries and illnesses, reducing our self-sufficiency. Muscle weakness, for instance, increases the risk of dangerous falls, with approximately 350,000 people in the US breaking a hip each year due to muscle deterioration. Aging challenges our ability to lead independent lives, making everyday activities progressively more challenging. Eventually, we may require constant assistance from family or medical professionals, potentially necessitating stays in hospitals or nursing homes. While the realities of aging and death are harsh, acknowledging them allows us to seek ways to alleviate the associated hardships and make the experience more manageable. Facing these inevitabilities head-on helps us prepare for the future with greater understanding and compassion. Modern medicine has significantly extended our lifespans, allowing us to live longer than ever before. In the past, diseases contracted after the age of 50 often led to swift deaths, but today, medical advances enable us to delay the deterioration of our bodies and postpone death. As a result, the proportion of elderly individuals in the population has risen dramatically over the last 2 centuries. In countries like Germany, Italy and Japan, the elderly now make up a significant proportion of society. Historically, families lived closely together, allowing children to care for aging parents. This arrangement enabled elderly individuals to remain at home engaged in daily family life. Conversely, those without family support often spent their final days in poor conditions. In contrast, modern healthcare professionals have assumed the caregiving roles once held by family members. This shift has led to a major change in where people die. In the past, a majority of deaths occurred at home, but now most occur in hospitals or care homes due to the dispersion of families and the challenges of providing full-time care. While hospitals and nursing homes offer medical care and hygiene, they often fall short in understanding the emotional and psychological needs of individuals nearing the end of their lives. The evolving landscape of aging and dying underscores the importance of holistic care that encompasses not just physical health, but also emotional and spiritual well-being. In youth, independence reigns supreme, allowing individuals to live on their own terms without interference. However, as life progresses, a point arrives when complete independence becomes untenable, particularly in old age or during illness. Yet, relinquishing lifelong values is not the desired outcome. In both youth and old age, the yearning for autonomy and a sense of purpose persists. Despite the limitations imposed by aging or illness, individuals strive to preserve some degree of independence. For instance, if an avid cook faces challenges shopping for groceries due to old age, they would prefer assistance with shopping rather than abandoning cooking altogether. Perspectives on life evolve as one realizes their time on earth is drawing to a close. Everyday pleasures take precedence over the pursuit of new experiences, and relationships with family and friends grow in significance. Research by psychologist Laura Carsten reveals that while younger individuals favoured spending time with new and exciting characters, elderly and HIV-positive individuals prioritise spending time with close family and friends. Despite the potential for increased contentment and relaxation with age, many still fear growing old. Part of this apprehension can be attributed to the failure of medical institutions in meeting the psychological and emotional needs of the elderly. The perception of old age homes often aligns with drabness and loneliness, a somewhat accurate stereotype. Routines in nursing homes and intensive care units can infringe on autonomy, replacing personal privacy with regimented schedules. Caregivers often find it easier to make decisions for the elderly, inadvertently diminishing their sense of capability. While these facilities excel in medical care, they may lack the warmth and appreciation residents seek. Understaffing, particularly of geriatricians, contributes to this issue, leaving limited time for personalised attention. Currently, family remains the alternative to institutional neglect, but managing elderly or sick care is challenging, and families may not always make optimal decisions. Around 25% of healthcare costs in the US are spent on treating individuals in the final year of life, despite constituting just 5% of all patients. While some treatments are crucial, many represent futile attempts to prolong life, causing more harm than good. Patients and doctors often cling to hopeful delusions when choosing treatments, despite unfavourable odds. Doctors sometimes fail to convey the terminal nature of illnesses, promoting unrealistic hopes to avoid crushing patients and their families. Over 40% of oncologists admit offering treatments they deemed unlikely to succeed. This leads terminally ill individuals to opt for aggressive treatments with severe side effects, sacrificing present well-being for a slim chance of extending life. However, valuing time over quality of life can result in anxiety and suffering. Studies reveal that terminally ill patients who forego intensive treatments and opt for hospice or home care experience a higher quality of life in their final weeks. Decisions regarding when to fight, when to let go, and how to improve the dying experience pose challenging questions for doctors, patients, and families. Modern medical care often falls short of meeting the needs and desires of individuals facing death. To promote both aging and dying well, services should prioritize autonomy while offering compassionate support and guidance when required. Assisted living is one model that respects residents' autonomy, providing a home-like environment where they determine their activities, risk tolerance, and assistance levels. Alternative approaches to elderly housing, such as incorporating gardens and fostering connections with children and animals, can significantly improve residents' well-being, reducing prescription rates and mortality. Expanding and enhancing hospice services is crucial, emphasizing living fully before passing away instead of focusing solely on medical treatment. Open and honest communication with doctors and family members is essential as we seek new ways to manage aging and illness. In the complex doctor-patient relationship, especially with terminally ill patients, doctors must strike a balance between compassion and professionalism. They should offer well-informed guidance, neither dictating treatment nor leaving patients to navigate on their own. Doctors should provide comprehensive information, discuss realistic options, discover the patient's priorities, and offer their perspective. For instance, they can help patients prioritize activities that matter most to them and provide treatment options to support those activities, even if it might shorten life. In extreme cases, discussions about assisted death, although legally complicated, can help patients prioritize their desires and alleviate suffering. As aging and dying increasingly involve doctors, improving communication skills is vital to meeting patients' needs effectively. Confronting old age, disease, and death openly is essential to making the end of life less daunting and finding meaning in it. It's common to avoid discussing these topics until it's too late, leaving us with rushed decisions and a less dignified farewell. Initiating conversations about what matters most in our final hours and what makes life worth living can clarify our desires for old age and how we want to exit this world. This process empowers us to retain authorship over our lives until the end and shape our dying role by deciding what we pass on and how we'll be remembered. Openly addressing these aspects can make mortality a less painful experience with newfound purpose. So to sum up, Dr. Mannix says, in With the End in Mind, that dying is often less frightening than our fears lead us to believe. While there can be exceptions, many individuals experience a relatively peaceful passing. Coping with terminal illness brings forth numerous challenges, yet people can display remarkable resilience. They don't have to navigate this journey alone, as end-of-life care specialists offer support, often employing techniques like cognitive behavioral therapy. Family and friends can also provide invaluable support, but addressing societal taboos around death may be necessary to facilitate open and honest communication. Dr. Gawande says in Being Mortal that whether we like it or not, we're all going to die. Luckily, we have our entire lives to prepare for our inevitable end. This preparation requires us to think seriously about what is most important to us in life and to share these values with our friends, family, and doctors, while also doing what we can to make life in the nursing home more rewarding. I've been very conscious of my mortality since a young age due to living under precarious circumstances, and then fast forward 30 years, living with a disability makes you even more aware of your body. It's okay to be afraid, but it's important to make space for conversations around death. What do you think? Are you afraid of talking about death? Let us know. Please join in on the conversation by following @HowToBe247 on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and subscribe on the podcast, which can be found via www.howtobe247.com. We have Spotify polls, so feel free to send your responses there too. You can even check out all our exclusive, unseen bonus material from every single interview, all for a price of a coffee, on both Spotify and Patreon under the name Behind the Scenes, exclusives from the How to Be Books podcast. All the latest ones are on Spotify, while more than 30 exclusives are on Patreon. We've also launched a shop on Patreon where you can buy one-off exclusives. Sign up to be part of the movement. Please do leave a review if you found this helpful and you want to be featured. Remember to check out the website. We spoke to many publishing experts on whether literature is important during times of conflict, especially relevant for right now, at the same time as speaking to editor and professor Atul Melnichuk about his anthology on writer Victoria Amelina, killed in a Russian airstrike in Ukraine. We've also had a number of guest posts from experts and had a great conversation with the Black to the Future Festival organisers about their series of events exploring Afrofuturism. We were also at the Clapham Book Festival and Margate Bookie. And reviews for Brittany's new memoir and Hilary Mantle's posthumous essays are up, so don't miss out. Remember to listen to the very end, as I wanted to introduce the excellent podcast The Comfortable Spot with Ken Sweeney, who has had some excellent guests this season. Before we go, here is Susan Leigh, counsellor and hypnotherapist from lifestyletherapy.net, on her thoughts. See you in 2 weeks' time.
Most endings are viewed with a certain amount of trepidation, whether it be our working life, our fertility, our marriage. There's a certain apprehension about moving into another phase of our life. And when we're talking about death, well, talking about it can make it seem so incredibly real. Are we dicing with death? Are we taking a chance if we talk about it and make it more real? Most people live their lives as if they've got another 10 years to go. They have a sense of invincibility. They don't want to think about it. And there is an apprehension. What happens after we die? Where do we go? Where do our loved ones go? Do we believe in religion? Do we believe in God? So death, talking about death, can be quite a scary thing to do.
Hi, I'm Ken Sweeney. This is The Comfortable Spot. The Comfortable Spot is a series of conversations with interesting people from different walks of life. You may not know all of them, but you might find them intriguing, so I hope you are sitting comfortably and happy to stay with us. You can find The Comfortable Spot on Google, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your favourite podcasts.